Hello and welcome to the Friday Total Soccer Show. I am Daryl Grove, and sitting across the table from me, at least for now, is a man who just got a big job offer in China. It's Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello, yeah, I'm excited to go there, tell people they don't know what they're doing, kind of not really have a plan, and in the end make a lot of money.
So what is this about, Taylor? You told me about this just before we started recording.
I did. So there's a story doing the rounds that Trinidad, who recently fired their coach, have appointed a coach that DJ Ringus, TSS Scout, is not too pleased about.
Yeah, it's a Belgian gentleman by the name of Tom Saintfiet.
Scrambling in the papers, he finds it. But before that, apparently
I got it in time.
Apparently they had made contact with Jurgen Klinsmann, who had declined the offer because he had already committed to coach in China. That's the rumor, at least.
Can we just take a moment to imagine the US facing Trinidad in the Hex with Klinsmann coaching Trinidad?
I would be happier.
Would you? But you imagine if they beat us?
I mean, they might, but by the same token, it's a guy who, again, doesn't have a tactical plan and is going to be like, go out there and play hard. I don't think that would work too well. I'd rather have that than a coach who's going to come out and have an organized Trinidad team, since they are pretty good if they have a plan.
So, quick take on this then. What does this mean if Klinsmann does take a job in China? Obviously, he's going testing himself at the highest level. What does this mean for the rumours linking Klinsmann with LAFC, the MLS franchise?
I think those were, first of all, just rumours because people kind of still equate them with Chivas USA a little bit, maybe. And so there's an idea that they would just like bring in the big name to do kind of the headline grabbing, attention grabbing.
Yeah, and I guess it's also like he's in California, they're in California.
Yeah, I think he sold his house, though, so I'm not sure about that
okay.
one. But, I mean, it could still definitely be the case because he could go to China for 1 year. Lots of people have done that, made a lot of money, and then come back and go coach LAFC. I think other coaches out there who would make a lot more sense, and I think...
For LAFC?
Yeah, and so I think that it makes sense for him because I really do think that he's been kind of exposed. And really, to go back to your initial question, I think I wish he were coaching Trinidad because I think a lot of those U.S. players would like nothing more than to embarrass him. And so I think it would be a U.S. team playing more aggressive and like amped up soccer than you've seen in a very long time. But I think he has been a little bit exposed, and so I think moving to China, getting that big payday, it makes sense if he were to do it. Again, it is just a rumor, but we'll see what happens.
I think Klinsmann's defense, it kind of makes sense for anyone, right? To go and do a 1 year sort of show me all the money kind of thing.
On Thursday's Goalmouth, I was talking about that study that like a Norwegian English company or two companies did about the best paid players in the world, and a lot of them are in China. Of
course
like
they are.
15% of the world's best paid players are playing in China.
Including guys like Graziano Pelle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who are, with all respect to Pelle, who I think is a really great striker. I think he's a really good striker.
There it is.
He's not Neymar.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. Other
who I think it's Hulk is the fourth best player in the world, or fourth highest paid player in the world, and I think Neymar's the fifth. So there you go.
Other news this morning, is that Gianni Infantino has proposed that his 48-team World Cup with 16 groups of 3 may have penalty shootouts at the end of tied games to prevent, collusion, like where the last two teams just need a tie to both go through, and also maybe just to liven things up a bit.
Yeah, I think that's more it, because I mean, really, the last time there's always talk about will teams collude to have a result, but really that's few and far between, and really the only one is that you always remember the name.
The Anschluss game.
There it is. Thank you. I always think that's it, and I can't remember because I always feel like that's some vaguely Nazi Germany term.
Well, I mean, it is also that.
Yeah, also that. Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's that, but I think it's more so to liven up the group stage games, and that's kind of what hockey did. Hockey didn't used to have shootouts at the end of regulation. People got bored of ties, and so they made it kind of incentivized, exciting moments, and that's what penalty shootouts are.
So I didn't read the story. I saw a headline today about we are NASLing the World Cup. Because they famously had the shootouts in the 70s.
I hadn't seen that, but I like that idea because I love the idea of maybe keeping penalty shootouts as they are for the knockout rounds, but for the group stage, it's the NASL shootout where you have to dribble in from 35 yards out. Yeah, I would love that. Or vice versa.
That would be too far for traditionalists, I think.
Oh, yeah.
That would be crazy.
It would for
It would also be awesome to see.
But I do see a lot of people who, like Brits who mock the United States for calling it soccer and for having the clock that counts the wrong way and gimmicky team names. At the same time, I've seen multiple people say that's a pretty cool idea.
I don't think England would do well on a World Cup with multiple penalty shootouts.
No one does. That's the thing. No one does.
Maybe England will get more practice.
Oh, I see what you were getting at here.
It actually might fix England's problem. Like, is it called immersion therapy, where you just have to face your fears?
Yes. Yes.
So like the 0-0 draw that they scrapped out against Slovakia in the Euros, there would have been a penalty shootout at the
exactly.
end.
or it does the opposite, and it makes you so terrified of them that it really incentivizes winning in regulation.
Yes. So what do we think then of, okay, the penalty shootouts is one thing, but I have come around to the idea of this 16 groups of 3. Every 48 teams get to go. Every team gets at least 2 games, and I feel like it would be exciting because there wouldn't be too many group stage games, if that makes sense. There wouldn't be that game where, both these teams are out. Because that can't happen because one of those teams is definitely going through. Again,
to go back to my goal mouth, sorry, I keep dropping it. I'm okay with it. Of all the proposed format changes, I guess that one is the one that I'm the most okay with. That said, it still feels like the only reason for this is to make it bigger. And it's not like, there's clearly a problem or things need to be dealt with or this situation isn't working. The format, it has blown things out of proportion. It needs to be adjusted. It just seems like it's sort of Infantino has made promises that he's going to expand the World Cup. So let's go ahead and expand the World Cup. And I would also be fine if they kept it in its current format.
Right. We had this conversation the other day, right? It's still the World Cup. It's good. It's good either way.
But it does seem like the 16 group one, 3 teams in each group, is probably
it's a lot of alphabet will get used in that time.
Yeah, exactly, man. I think it's the one that I like the most because I don't like the idea of 5 teams in a group and 2 advance. I really, really hate the idea of the 1-game playoff to decide who makes the group stage.
I didn't hate it so much. I could watch that.
I just think it would be a huge bummer. I mean, for reasons that we're going to discuss
the US
later
to have
on.
One game, for example.
It's a shame.
Because we'd be in that group probably of teams that only get one go.
Oh, absolutely, we would. Yeah, and so then it becomes like you've worked for 3 years to get to a tournament, and 1 game you're out. I know that would increase the drama, but I think it would also make people far less inclined to travel to a World Cup.
Right. Okay, speaking of CONCACAF teams qualifying for the World Cup, we had a question a couple of weeks ago from DJ Ringus about the CONCACAF World Cup qualifying process. He sent this question before the proposed changes to the expansion of the World Cup.
Yeah.
But I actually think this question is even more germane now that there are potentially more spots for CONCACAF available.
I don't know why the word germane makes me laugh, but it does.
It's because it's a fancy word?
I think it's because I immediately thought of Jones, then Jackson. So
is that your germane hierarchy?
And then Pennant. Yes.
Way down. Way down. So DJ sent us this email, pointed us towards an article written by Terence Ross, which highlights that in CONCACAF World Cup qualifying right now, the system is kind of broken because a significant proportion of the nations in CONCACAF are eliminated a full 18 months and sometimes 3 years before the tournament. So we went and looked at this, right? There's 35 nations in CONCACAF, and I think...
we really need one more, is what we've learned.
Yeah. And 7 are out after that first round play-in, and more are out after the second round
10,
play-in.
I think, out after the second round.
A lot of nations knocked out. And then... even worse, teams like Canada, Jamaica, Guatemala, Haiti, they didn't make it to the Hex, so they don't have soccer for a whole year, and they have no hopes of World Cup qualifying.
And I think that was the new CONCACAF's, do you remember his name? I've forgotten it. The new president's name, basically he was saying...
He's a Canadian gentleman.
He is, which sounds Italian, as I recall. But his point was it's a shame because if you're looking for a sponsor or someone to back the team, when's your next competitive game? 3 years. I can see the point there. For sure.
So DJ asks, would a change in the format for World Cup qualifying in CONCACAF be beneficial to the region's development? And essentially, how would we do it? So DJ had sent this question with the idea that there were 3.5 spots for a 32-team World Cup, which is what CONCACAF currently has. Let's say, for a future World Cup, 48-team World Cup, I think it's reasonable to expect us to get at least 4.5 or 5 spots, right?
I would say so, because we're at 32 right now. You increase it by 16. So that's like a 150% increase or whatever. So
we should get something.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. You get a little bit there.
Okay, so the 2 problems I see with World Cup qualifying the way it is, and if you're not familiar, is that all these smaller nations go out after 1 2-legged game, right? And then they're gone for years, right? There's no hope of playing any more World Cup qualifiers. President of CONCACAF was essentially saying, how can they do that
By the way, haven't looked it up. You haven't seen me type anything. I think it's Victor Montagnoli. It's something like that.
Montagliani.
So, there it is. Yes. There we go. We got there eventually.
It's definitely Victor.
We're going to go with Victor. Let's just call him Victor. CONCACAF President Victor.
Victor says.
Yes.
Those teams that go out early, when they say to sponsors, hey, do you want to sponsor our next World Cup game? Yeah. And they're like, when's that? And he's like, 3 years. And they're like, maybe call us in 2.5 years. And then also, as DJ pointed out, teams like Canada, Jamaica, Guatemala, Haiti, these are good teams who they just shouldn't be disqualified from World Cup qualifying so early by failing to make the hex.
Right.
We think we have some sort of solution. We don't have all the maths figured out. We have the spirit figured out.
We do.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so.
And I'll turn it over to you, Taylor, to explain what we've scribbled down on paper.
There we go. Yeah, so I think right now, basically, that the one you mentioned where you have the two-legged, one-game thing, and that's it. That's the first round, right? You end up having 4 rounds, the fourth round being the hex.
Actually, the 5th round is the hex. It's the first, second, third round is where, Anguilla and the US Virgin Islands and those guys get eliminated.
Regardless, you basically would have 3 rounds instead, is what we've kind of landed on, you and I, and you'd have a double hex as the final round.
So 3 rounds and double hex.
So instead of just having those 6 teams, you have 12 teams as your final round, and then you could basically then eliminating one of those rounds allows you to have like multiple group stages in between, so then more teams get more games.
So it's 3 separate group stages, starting with the smaller teams, and top 1 or 2 from those go through to the next group stage, where you would then include US, Mexico, Costa Rica. The big boys would come in the second group stage. Then going through from the second group stage, you end up with 12 teams, which then splits into the double hex, 2 hex groups. So the upside I see is, 1, all those smaller nations get at least an entire group stage. So they get, 3 to 6 games maybe?
Yeah.
If you play everybody home and away, you get 6 games.
Exactly.
That's much better.
And then you have time for that because you've eliminated one of the groups, or one of the phases, basically.
Yes.
So then you could have more time.
Yeah, we've checked this against match days, right? This works out.
Because I think that's a big problem, is that's why you have that home and away and then you're done.
Yeah.
Is because you've got to kind of get moving through the groups. Exactly.
Okay, then in the second group stage, that's when the big boys come in. But also, the teams that do make it through, say Montserrat make it through, they get to play the US or Mexico or Costa Rica.
Right. Yeah.
Then the final stage, because there's a double hex, that means that this time Jamaica, Canada, crucially for the CONCACAF president, Haiti, Guatemala, other teams would make it through and go. They'll complete a full World Cup qualifying cycle, even if they don't qualify for the World Cup. That is beneficial. Like, how much would Canada right now benefit from having 10 games in the hex?
Absolutely, they would. I mean, and that's part of it, is that you get those teams more games, you keep that competitive. Obviously, it doesn't answer like the issue of, for some of those smaller countries, then they're out in 2015 for qualifying that goes through 2017.
But someone's got to go, right? If you look at the list of teams, someone like Montserrat, they are so small, they can't really realistically expect to be all the way through World Cup qualifying.
No, I mean, and that's so initially when we were talking about this, I made that joke that we need one more team, and that's because with 36 teams, you can divide things up a lot more readily. So if you have 36, you could do like 6 groups of 6 teams, and the top team goes through or whatever.
Yeah.
But the reality is, you don't really want that, because if you're the United States, you don't want that, because then you're never going to play really competitive games. You're going to end up playing, like, at best, I think a team you would draw is Haiti or Jamaica or Canada. Yeah. But more than likely, you're going to get
top 6, like the teams that are in the hex right now, they'd be spread all across the top of the groups, right?
Exactly.
So they'd never meet. Yeah.
And so then maybe you get one of those teams, and then you do get at least a little bit of like competition there. But more likely, you're going to get teams like St. Vincent and below, where then you're going to cruise through qualifying, but then you're going to cruise through qualifying. It's never going to be competitive. You're never going to be really challenged, so you're not going to be ready for the World Cup.
The one downside I see with this is probably US and Mexico would be seeded into 2 different hex groups. Maybe Costa Rica above one of them. So that's
how it would be right now. It'd be the United States, I think, in with Costa Rica, and Mexico in the other group. So
that means there's no US Mexico game, which is kind of the thing we look forward to in the hex right now. So do we? Or does CONCACAF, maybe from their perspective, do they sacrifice that game, which is a moneymaker, right, to rearrange this group stage?
I don't think so, because I think then you could also make the argument that it's sort of like the Old Firm Derby, where it ends up they play each other like 8 times a year in the end, and it kind of loses meaning the more they play. Yeah. But when it's a very special, when they haven't played for 4 years, and so they're finally meeting
again. It's been special recently now, Rangers are back in the top 5.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
But I think it could be kind of the same thing with USA-Mexico, where they play each other a lot. Like, I think they've played each other, like, I'm totally wrong, but like 5 times in the last year. Or in the last, like, not calendar year, but like the last 12 months. I feel like there's been a lot of USA-Mexico games.
Right.
And I think it might
that
become...
number doesn't check out for me, but I get what you're saying. There has been
I feel like there was
CONCACAF Cup, Gold Cup.
Yeah.
Actually, didn't play the Gold Cup, did they? That was the problem.
Like, World Cup qualifying, there's maybe friendly in there. I don't know. There's been a lot of games, is what I'm saying. And because of that, maybe it loses a little bit of that significance. And if you're not playing each other so often, then maybe the times that you do become extra special, and especially the times you do in competitive matches like the Gold Cup and World Cup qualifying, whereas before it's kind of a given you're going to face each other twice in the hex. Now it becomes like, oh, we're playing Mexico. It's a big deal. Let's do this.
And there's also, again, there's no guarantee that US and Mexico are the 2 top seeds going forward.
Very
because
true.
Of teams like Costa Rica who are racking up points.
Right.
Like, they could easily be the top 2 seeds. And then you could end up as US is like the second seed or just drawn in with Mexico. So that could happen in the future.
Right. And I think that this also makes the most sense because with those 12 teams, you can then, if you have the double hex, you also can, I think...
Trademark double hex.
Yeah. First of all, we should do that. Second of all, I think you then have more money to spend on those 12 teams if you're the federation, or confederation, excuse me, so that you can help subsidize travel if you need to.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just have 36 teams, if somebody else joins, and then you have 6 groups of 6, that means that you could have Canada playing in Vancouver against, against Curacao, and then all of a sudden that's a massive travel plan that you have to take into consideration. That's a lot of expenses that are going to be incurred for FAs that probably can't afford them, some of the smaller island nations.
She's saying maybe CONCACAF would have to give Curacao some money to make that trip.
Or it just becomes a huge pain, a huge logistical nightmare, whereas if you have those kind of localized like group stage rounds, then I think you can kind of deal with that, have them all play each other, and then once they advance, then there is more money to help subsidize those travel plans.
Because you can't subsidize everybody without the confederation going under, essentially. Right?
And I just don't think as a confederation you need Mexico drawn into a group with like St. Kitts and Antigua and Barbuda and, I don't know, Guam or whoever. Well, Guam is in AFC, but like tiny nations that then get destroyed 8-1 and 8-0 and 10-1. That doesn't make it look good if Mexico breezed through qualifying with 10 wins, no losses, and a goal difference of 87.
But those nations do enjoy a game against the big boys.
That is true.
That's part of it, right?
That
and
is
maybe
true.
just winning the early group stages earns you that, right? So that's what you're angling for, because really.
If you make
Curacao don't start thinking we're going to qualify for the World Cup. They think we might get a big game against Mexico.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's why I think the 3 stages that we've come up with makes more sense than just having a big like European style like group draw.
One thing I realized we haven't done is explain how the double hex actually gets you to the World Cup. So 5 spots. I think it makes sense. Top 2 from each group, and then maybe the third place from each group plays off against each other. Meets in the middle. And then that's the winner goes as the fifth berth to the World Cup.
Absolutely.
This would make the hex more competitive because right now, like we said, 3.5 spots out of 6, it's quite a lot. You can finish 4th and you're still in with a good chance.
Can you imagine if they didn't change it though? So we got 5 spots and it was like 5 out of the 6 teams in the hex really don't finish bottom. Is I guess what we're getting at here.
Right now, the US would not be going.
That's
to the
true.
World Cup. I'm just glad they don't stop it after 2 games.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Some other US soccer news this week, Taylor. We were expecting on Monday for the US soccer, I think the Board of Governors met in New York. We were expecting a decision on division alignments and certifications on the back of NASL not officially folding but being in real deep trouble right now with New York Cosmos essentially ceasing operations. Did we talk about this on the show, that it's now, what we reported last week is now more or less official, right? As in players have been released, the staff have been told, don't come back, essentially. They will not be playing in 2017.
Yeah, at first it felt like NASL was giving a press conference in front of a building that was on fire, saying like, no, things are fine, don't worry about it. And now it just feels like the podium from the press conference is still there.
Yeah.
There's just no one speaking into it as the building continues to burn down.
And this isn't the news, but what I realised is that maybe the reason there's been no announcement from the New York Cosmos is that all the staff are furloughed.
Yep.
There is no communications person to put the tweet out, to update the website, because why would you if you're not being paid and you're being kind of disrespected by the organisation you've worked for? Why help them put their message out?
Speaking of that, there is a GoFundMe out there, I forget the name of it if you wanted to search for it, that is basically raising funds to give some money, give some gifts to that front office staff who have been laid off, who haven't been paid. I think there's employees who haven't been paid in like 6 weeks.
Yes.
So
and
right on the holiday season.
Worked hard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. So there is that GoFundMe if you wanted to look for it. And I think a lot of the funds that have been raised already are from Cosmos season ticket holders who are basically giving the amount they would have paid for season tickets to that fund.
Aw,
yeah,
that's perfect.
Soccer people sometimes are great people.
Yes.
Sometimes.
All right, so the news from US Soccer on Monday was...
Actually, I'm saying most of the time soccer people are good people.
Oh, yeah. You just hear about the bad stuff when it happens.
This is true.
They said US Soccer says we need an extra 7 to 10 days to announce the alignments. MLS was announced as Division 1, obviously. NBSL was announced as Division 1 in the women's game. But they didn't make an announcement on whether USL was Division 2 or what NASL was going to be.
Right.
So that's maybe what? So a week from Monday would be either next Monday or Wednesday. That's your 7 to 10 day window to hear what happened. There was a sort of inside report from Jeff Reuter on 55-1, which I think is a Minnesota-based website. essentially saying that what's happened is they're going to give USL Division 2 status. I think 99% sure is what they said. They're not going to give NASL Division 3 status because I think NASL don't want that anyway, right? And what's happening right now is they're just negotiating behind the scenes to get as many NASL teams on the USL lifeboat as possible, because that stuff doesn't happen easily, right? Like normally there would be expansion fees and all that kind of stuff, so I think they have to decide exactly how they're doing that.
Right. And I think part of that is that you have teams like Puerto Rico, for example, who are in NASL. No word on what their plans are as of yet. It seems, other than their press release that was 3 sentences long, the second sentence being, we plan to play competitive soccer in 2017.
Right.
But the problem there is that for USL, and we talked about this with CONCACAF, it applies here with the USL, the United States, I know you're not like really ready for this breaking news, Daryl, it's big. It's pretty large.
Is it?
Yeah, if you didn't know that.
I mostly just go from my place to this office. It's
like
that's
miles.
it. It's like a 3-mile corridor, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's all it is. But
you can do it on bike.
We've talked about this so many times when people make the big, like the big to-do about like, oh, Newcastle have to travel to Brighton or whatever, and it's the longest journey possible at 300 miles. And it's like, that's a home game for some teams. So
it's a local rival for some
but I
teams.
mean, that's the problem, though, is that if you're the Kickers and all of a sudden Puerto Rico are in the Eastern Conference, now you have to figure out how to get to
Puerto Rico.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or if you kind of combine it into one giant league, then the Kickers have to do like a West Coast swing, and it becomes a financial problem. So you have to kind of take that into consideration when figuring out what to do with these NASL life raft teams.
So what I've read is that essentially FC North Carolina, who've rebranded and have MLS ambitions, they'll be happily joining USL. Because if you have MLS ambitions, USL's a good place to be, right? Same for Tampa Bay Rowdies and Ottawa Fury. Tampa Bay Rowdies have announced MLS ambitions. Indy 11 and Jacksonville Armada happily joining USL. The problem teams are Puerto Rico, because of the travel that you mentioned, FC Edmonton, because of the travel, and because there may be the Canadian Premier League coming, so they've got a decision to make. San Francisco Deltas, who were an NASL expansion team who haven't sort of taken the field yet, so they've got to decide, do we go or do we not go? And the most problematic one of all, can you guess?
The Cosmos?
No, the Cosmos will not be involved. Miami FC.
Yes,
because they're in future Beckham Town. So that's where USL has to make the decision of, do we, because they're not owned by MLS, right? They're just in close partnership. Do we openly compete with MLS in terms of having a Miami franchise in the USL?
It's tough to say.
It's hard, right?
I mean, I guess this would require some machinations that I'm not even sure are possible, but you could say, like, maybe Miami FC becomes Beckham's USL affiliate.
Yeah, you want those two partners to meet, right? So Maldini owns that team. So
Maldini owns that team. I think Nesta is the coach right now.
Does Maldini play with Beckham?
Yes. There you go. So it could work. You could have the Milan connection.
They need to meet for an espresso.
That brief Milan connection. Yeah. So maybe that. But, I mean, that's an issue. I mean, and just the fact that Miami FC used to exist in Major League Soccer.
Right.
So too did Tampa Bay. It didn't work out too well.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously not the Rowdies. Worth pointing out. But still, you have those things to take into consideration, those past relationships, good or bad, that need to be worked out.
And so we've been making the case on TSS that we don't want people to lose jobs. We don't want teams to fold. We don't want NASL as a league necessarily. We're not going to celebrate it folding. But we are in favour of just an organised pyramid where we all know that MLS is Division 1. We all know that USL is Division 2. And all the clubs in there have the financial security of USL's organisational structure. And D3, it looks like, might be some of those sort of not as advanced USL teams. So you may end up with a top tier USL, bottom tier USL.
This is what we want, you mean? Because right now it looks like it's going to be
that's
MLS, but it's going to be MLS, USL, and then NPSL is the likely scenario.
I don't think NBSL will be D3. I think it's too like not quite professional. Yeah.
Right.
So there may be no D3. But either way, we would have a structured pyramid where we know where all the levels are at.
Gotcha.
Okay. We got a question from Adam Kalin, who essentially sees this the other way. So I thought it was worth considering. Okay. I'm going to read Adam Kalin's question to you.
Please do.
Okay, Adam says, I understand your desire for the end of the dueling Division 2-3 leagues and a true pyramid. That said, as someone who has come to believe that the biggest thing holding back soccer from becoming a sport on the level of or bigger than the current major league sports in America is the lack of promotion relegation. So I'm concerned. After all, why invest in a local team if there is no path to ever growing and moving up the ladder, no matter how good you are? It had been my hope that Pro Rel would develop at the lower divisions until, several years from now, MLS would be forced to accept it also. Now, with your idea of a USL of competitive clubs as the D2 and maybe a USL 2 for development clubs as D3, I fear that will never happen. If USL 2 is the D3 league and it's just a developmental league, does that act as a roadblock to lower division clubs ever being able to move into it and then beyond?
All right. What part of those questions should we start with, Mr. Grove?
Let's start with why invest in a local club team if there is no path to ever growing and moving up the ladder?
Okay. Well, I think first off, I'm going to say that I don't even necessarily accept that statement.
Okay, let's say why then.
Okay, because, I mean, there have been plenty of USL teams now playing in Major League Soccer.
And NASL too.
Right. It's not through relegation promotion, obviously, but it is if you establish yourself as a financially viable, successful team that gets a good attendance, that has a plan and a roadmap for the future, you can become an MLS team. It's happened with Orlando. It happened with Portland. It's happening with Minnesota from an NASL perspective.
Yeah, 2017.
Yeah. So, I mean, you definitely have those growth strategies in place, and then you can move up to that next level.
This is what I'm coming to realize, is we do have promotion and relegation in the US. It's just business-based.
I wouldn't go that far because I feel like you're going to get yelled at. But I see your point, yeah.
But you do have teams can move up the ladder when you prove that you're a successful not franchise is the wrong word because they're not franchises, but when you have a successful team in a lower level, they can become an MLS franchise.
Actually, that's an interesting way to look at it.
FC Cincinnati met Don Garber off the plane and they were like, hey, we get 20,000 a game. How about us as an MLS team?
Yeah. But I think like you stumbled upon something that I think is pretty fascinating, which is this idea that like, yes, there are teams in England that get promoted, shouldn't have gotten promoted from a financial standpoint, try to compete,
but
fail,
from
and
an
crumble.
on-field performance standpoint.
But it comes from an on-field performance. But generally speaking, the idea is that clubs are stable, right? That if you move up, you move down, you're still going to continue to be a club. You're still going to have that money. You don't necessarily...
Because there's enough money in every league to make it happen. Yeah.
You don't necessarily have that guarantee in the United States where leagues have folded, clubs have folded. So maybe it becomes that like teams can compete on the field. If you get the talent, if you get the money, everybody knows you can win titles. Look at the Cosmos.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're going to be financially stable. So maybe the results on the field, like that are important for relegation promotion in England, like the relegation promotion strategy in the United States is how financially successful can you be? How stable are you?
Yeah.
Oh, you've been stable for 5 years? That means you're at the top of the stability table, and that means you go to the next level.
I kind of agree with that because that is like the danger of soccer in America is that teams fold and teams disappear, and that's how we get in some sort of US soccer death spiral. You know what I mean? So maybe it is just more important to have steady teams.
I know this is corporate and like terrible, so I apologize. At least I'm assuming it is. But like, I love the idea of there being some sort of.
You want an actual table?
Like an MLS promotion table, and it's like
attendance numbers.
Like like at the beginning of the year when your teacher gives you the syllabus and it says like what each thing counts for.
Yeah.
Like class participation is always 10%, which I'm sure it never is. But like I love the idea of like attendance, average attendance. If you have over this amount, that's 10%.
Yep.
And then it's like I don't know, gate receipts for how many whatever season ticket holders you have, and then it's also performance on the field is a 30% chunk, and then at the end of the season, you're top of the table. You're getting consideration next year from Don Garber. You're the first visit on Don Garber's MLS promotion tour.
I guarantee you're making so many people so angry.
Oh, I know.
Right now.
I know.
But I would say this in your and our defense, that this is kind of the realistic version of clubs not folding and finding a pathway to the top tier of domestic US soccer.
I always say that
not this table with attendance and stuff, but this idea of having a solid business plan.
I think I always call it contraction, but that's not what it was. I think you got the word right on Goalmouth a while back about like what it was when Miami and Tampa Bay went away.
Oh, it is contraction.
It
right?
is? Okay. Maybe I call it retraction.
The league gets smaller.
Yeah. But I was an MLS fan at that point. I lived through that. I honestly am still not in like the world of MLS as a given. Like, I'm still kind of...
Some people are. Some people are younger than you and they don't remember when it was dangerous and it could have collapsed.
And so that's why I'm not more like, it really should be relegation promotion, is because, like, I'm still of the mindset of, like, if we change too much, it could collapse.
Yep.
And I would rather have a system that's imperfect, but is still a system, than no system at all.
Produces a soccer league every year.
And again, I was a fan in 1995 with USISL and the 46,000 other leagues that existed because everybody had their own league and it was so fractured. We've gotten to the point now where we have like maybe a 2-tier system or 3 leagues. It used to be way more than that. And so I would like it to continue to be as it is.
Isn't that the capitalist argument as well? That if it is that USL is D2 next year and NASL essentially folds and disappears because there are no teams left in it and it's not financially viable, is it Adam Smith, the invisible hand argument is that these are the leagues that have survived. It's MLS has survived, USL has survived, and underneath that there's NPSL and other like more regional leagues. But
Maybe.
this is what works because it's what survived the big fight.
I'm gonna not accept capitalism, but I get your point. I'm gonna say it's gonna be soccer Darwinism is what I'm gonna call it, which is basically the leagues that have adapted and evolved and found the way to survive albeit in like, or maybe, if you live in an inhospitable landscape, you become an inhospitable creature. Maybe that's what you have to do to survive. It might not be ideal. You're not like fluffy and wonderful, but you're still there.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of it more as a series of creatures that have like circled up together and will only let people into the group if they can contribute to their little society that they've built around a campfire.
I feel like you're talking about Voltron here. Dystopian future homeless Voltron.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I gotcha.
That's the metaphor.
Yeah, I like it.
All right, so the other part of Adam's question was, what if we do accept that maybe you start a team and you can't go up the pyramid through results? And he's asking, why invest in a local club team? I would argue, as someone who's lived in Richmond for 10 years, 11 years now, 11 years, that the Kickers don't have like short-term MLS ambitions. They're still a massive force for good in the community. They allow me to go watch local soccer. They allow me to do play-by-play on the broadcast. So there's a reason to exist, even if you're not a top-level team.
And if you want to go further with that, I mean, they have a league or like a youth team that has done a good job of developing talent in the Richmond area. They do a lot in terms of... Nick
Tattague, who I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly, was just called up to Tab Ramos' US Under-20 roster. He may be in the U20 qualifying tournament in February.
Yeah, Will Pulisic.
Yeah, Will Pulisic.
Which is actually Will Pulisic. Yep. It was my joke. It was terrible.
Katie Cousins came through there. She played for the US U20s at the Women's World Cup.
Right.
These are like serious players are coming through.
And not to go too Richmond-centric, but that is a combination of the Kickers being with the Strikers and merging together for Richmond United. But still, you can then have your local club helping to promote youth soccer in the community. But obviously the Kickers also do a lot for like social growth and charitable organizations. And so you also have that element that having that team, supporting that team can help just spread soccer in the community. But it's also just a great excuse to, as you said, you have the Red Army in Richmond and you have even larger supporters groups elsewhere and just as passionate supporters groups elsewhere that get people together, and it's a good for the community, and you have smoke bombs and tailgates and, chants and tifos, and it's a good time.
You also... This like pyramid that we may end up with, the thing that got me excited last year about USL was watching Andrew Carlton play for Charleston Battery.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Watching Tyler Adams play for New York Red Bulls.
Derek Etienne Jr., Anatolia Bang,
It is a place where you can have this next generation of US players have a place to play, right? Professional soccer against grown men, right? That didn't exist not too long ago.
I mean, that's why I do wish that there was some way that USL could just be everybody plays everybody home and away. Because there are so many teams. Like, we could have gone to see Tommy Thompson, but obviously...
because East Coast, West Coast.
Yeah, exactly. But there's so many players in there that, I do feel like you're going to get a chance to say, I saw him play at City Stadium.
Definitely.
Way back before he was the 2026 World Cup champion.
I have a mental list of players that I've seen as teenagers that I think will be a big deal.
Oh, yeah. It's really exciting.
NBC?
Yeah.
Another one?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course. So, with all that said, and I know there's more to talk about, I do want to say, though, that I think both of us... Well, I'll speak for myself. You can say however you want.
All right.
I am inclined to want relegation promotion. Don't get me wrong.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously...
But in a way that doesn't collapse the system.
I remember as far back as like my Norwegian uncle came to visit when I was like 9, and he said like, oh, if the Kickers do well this season, will they move up to the next level? And I was like, well, there is no next level, but also no, like that's not how it works. But also kind of not understanding like, well, why is that? Like as a 9-year-old, I understood that something was weird about that. And so I do want that someday. I just don't think to demand it right now is ever going to happen. And it sort of is not even beating a dead horse. It's just sort of screaming into the nothingness because it's just not going to happen. But kind of promoting the change within and being like kind of flexible in your opinion and saying like, yeah, I can understand why they're doing this, but I hope that in the future and working towards that makes sense to me. And I think that's what I would say I'm trying to do. And I still stand by the idea that a stable pyramid where you do have MLS, USL, USL2 or whatever comes underneath, where there is just an obvious like this is this up to the top. The longer you have that in place, the more likelihood there is of being promotion relegation between those. Right? Because why would you, if you're MLS, why establish promotion relegation? They couldn't have done it last year. Like, would you have done it with NASL? Would you have done it with USL? Who would you do it with? You know what I'm saying? You need it to be in place before you can make the decision to do it. I also think if you did get everything in place, as you said, and then you establish relegation promotion, it could also become this like, because in my mind the problem right now is that the way American sports are set up, you can't have it, right? Like NBA obviously is the NBA, NFL the same, NHL, MLB. MLB, I guess, to a lesser extent because you have all
NASCAR.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, now you're just listing sports. Sports. Professional lacrosse. That's a thing, right? But I do think that if you establish this idea that you have this one dominant league, but then all of a sudden you can have relegation promotion, I do think like franchises like or organizations like the NFL would look at that and say, maybe we can like bump a team down, and all of a sudden we have the second tier NFL where we make more money, get more teams, and then we get it moving up and down. Maybe we do. Maybe we have NFL 2 now.
It's a way to get rid of the franchises you don't like.
Or just send them down, make them kind of reevaluate what they're doing, work again, and then come back up and rebuild.
I did see a quote today from Don Garber saying MLS 2 was a possibility they were thinking about, which could be the way that another way the pyramid gets structured. Again, all this will come out next week.
Yep.
We'll find out what's
we
going
shall see.
on. There is a second part to Adam's question. His next question, he says, is he said he may be getting ahead of himself, but it seems that due to the sheer size of our country and the cost of travelling across it, anything beyond D3 would need to be regionally based. As such, there could be multiple D4, D5, D6, etc. leagues. Is this the setup in other countries? I'm thinking that maybe other large countries like Brazil or China at least.
It is the setup for countries like Germany, even.
Yes.
I mean, Germany has like the
Regionalia.
Yeah, like the Bayern 2 team plays in a specific region, so that they don't have to travel all over the place. And I think I would go so far as to say that I think you need that if you established USL as like the second tier. I think you have it there.
So I think that's a mark of still how much work there is to do, right? The D2 USL teams, if that's what we end up with, teams like the Kickers, it would be financially really difficult for them to have to travel to the West Coast just so we could see them play Tommy Thompson, right? So even at that D2 USL level, you need some form of regionality, even if it's just East Coast, to keep costs contained. Essentially, you need not flights. You need stuff that can be done in a big bus, right?
And I think that I might hear from Charleston fans for saying this, but worth noting that the Richmond Kickers are the longest continuously operating professional soccer franchise.
I think they're joint with Charleston, right?
I think it's like Charleston took like 4 games off or something, and so that's the difference. But regardless, there's a reason why, is that they've been responsible in their spending and knowing their limits. And I think that they would very much have liked to have been able to do long road trips and extended stays elsewhere and play on the West Coast. But the reality is you kind of can't do that. You have to operate within your means.
Yep.
And so I think they're a good landmark for why they are the longest like continuously operating team, whereas other teams have come in, been like, no, we're going to do it this way, and then failed and flamed out.
Exactly. And I'm looking at now, like I think it's NPSL, Detroit City FC, right? That was a team that was started, it's seen mostly by supporter sort of influence, and we're going to get this done. They raised money to sort of renovate a stadium. It's a team that's slowly growing within NPSL, right? If there is a D3 league, that's an aim for them would be not to take Detroit City FC suddenly to be an MLS franchise, right? That's crazy. You can't. There just isn't the financial capability to do that. But you could take that small next step up. You could prove you're financially viable to do that, get yourself into D3. Then you build some more from there. And then you do have up and up and up in that way.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that that's something that we would both like to see is like those kind of supporter-driven clubs being rewarded for that. And I know the idea there would be that is like then you get bigger attendances, and that means more money, and that means better players, and that means you move up in a relegation promotion system. But I also think that maybe isn't necessarily always going to be the case. If you have really vocal, passionate fans, you can have bad owners. And so I think that like it does make sense to reward those franchises that have that sort of supporter mentality behind them.
So before we move on to our conversation with Matt Doyle about MLS Cup, anything else to add on this question from Adam?
I think so. I think I'll just add this.
God bless you.
Well, it's not even about this conversation. It's about people who are listening to this conversation. Because I know there are people out there who love Major League Soccer and think relegation promotion is stupid. I think they're maybe in the minority as opposed to people, at least on Twitter, who want relegation promotion, who think it would be a really good idea. And I know a lot of people probably have taken issue with this conversation we've had. We've probably already gotten emails before people have gotten to this point in the show. Look, I know that we've said some stuff that people disagree with, and there really might be some stuff that has already been disproven or that people have been saying for decades, and I accept that. But when people listen to this, if you do want to get in touch with us about this conversation, I just think the relegation promotion conversation, it tends to be so aggressive that it limits the conversation and the discourse you can have about it.
Yes.
So if people want to get in touch and disagreeing is fine. But, just don't start with like, hey, idiots. Start with like, hey, guys, like the show. Here's one thing I thought. Whatever.
We have a special folder for emails that start, hey, idiots.
Yeah. It's the trash folder. Yeah. I like that you made it subtle and I hit it home. But yeah, so that's what I would say is just like, it's a very nuanced conversation that you and I have kind of waded into here, and I welcome other people's perspectives. I just encourage people to be civil in their perspectives. Please.
Speaking of being civil, Taylor over there interviewed Matt Doyle about MLS Cup final, Toronto v Seattle. It's our sort of final preview in a sort of a trifecta, 3 previews in 3 days. I actually haven't heard it because you did it without me in the room. So here it is.
Joining me now, I've got senior editor over at MLSsoccer.com. It's Matt Doyle. Matt, hello again.
Hello again. It's good to be back on.
Yeah, it's nice to have you, and I appreciate you taking the time. I imagine it's a fairly hectic time period for you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. Today's a big day just in terms of filming a lot of stuff, and I'm in the middle of writing my tactical preview right now, and then it gets really busy later with all the drinking that I have to do. So, yeah.
Well, I think, why don't we just go ahead and save you time? Instead of writing your tactical preview, just say it all on this show, and then you don't have to worry about it. That seems fair, right?
That's not a bad idea. Yeah.
Well, I guess that is why we want to talk to you, or why I want to talk to you. So I guess without spoiling too much, we wanted to go into some of the tactics for this game. But first off, I'm just wondering how excited you are for this final, if you think it's a good representation of this season, if you think it's going to be a good one, if you think it'll be able to live up to that Eastern Conference final.
I'm super pumped for it, actually, because I think these are probably two of the most entertaining teams in the league, and they have, for my money, the two best players in Giovinco and Ladero, and that is a pretty good starting point. As for being a good representation of the league or of the year that we just had, this year was bizarre from beginning to end in MLS. So I wouldn't say that this game would perfectly represent it, but I do think it's a good representation of the talent level that you can find in MLS these days.
That works. Well, so you mentioned Ladero. Let's jump right into it. So Daryl and I talked about this. We talked to Alexi Lalas about this. If you are Toronto, how do you go about shutting down Ladero? How do you handle that movement, his vision, his passing ability, and his goal-scoring ability? What do you do to take him out of this game if you're Toronto and Greg Vanney?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's exactly what I said.
I literally just wrote something about that. I'm not sure there is a way to actually stop him. I think you can slow him down in certain ways, but the guy has been a juggernaut since he came into the league. And the other thing is, I don't think you want to change your system so much. You kind of have to just trust that the guys can figure it out and get it done, and then go in the other direction and outscore them, which is, of course, what Toronto's been doing all postseason.
Well, last time you were here, I think we talked a little bit about the role of Michael Bradley for Toronto, and basically kind of getting to the point that he is given the freedom, right? It's sort of, he doesn't have too much defensive responsibility. He's kind of allowed to maybe pick up a man here and there, but generally speaking, he's looking to play those balls, be that person in transition. If he gets into 1v1 situations, if he is doing defensive work against Ladero, do you think that Toronto are in trouble? Do you think that their game plan has gone south? Or is there a chance that he is going to be tasked with some defensive responsibilities on Saturday night?
Well, I think he's always going to be tasked with defensive responsibilities. And for some reason with Michael Bradley, his shortcomings always just become a point of contention among the fan base, which is, that's part of the life. But I think that he will mostly be really good, but there are certain times when help needs to arrive quicker than it has, I think, for TFC this postseason. And that's why I think Will Johnson is probably going to start. Instead of being a 3-5-2 where it's Bradley as the back point and then two guys, it was Osorio and Cooper ahead of him, I think it'll be Bradley and Johnson deep and then Cooper ahead of them, kind of as a de facto number 10. It's very similar to what they've been doing, but as just a little bit more of a clog in that central midfield area, which I think will make it harder on Ladero and give Bradley a few more options in terms of picking his passes and maybe combining a little bit.
That makes sense. So we've talked about the center of midfield. Let's go wide for a second, because you mentioned you don't want to have to change your game too much if you're either one of these teams. Obviously, both of them favor those attacking fullbacks, attacking wingbacks, however you want to call it. Do you think either one of them adjusts that game plan, given that that does leave so much space in behind and both of these teams are so good on the counter?
I think that, what we've seen from Seattle is that they play differently on the road. So they always do like to sit a little bit deeper, and I think that might take away from some of the stuff that Toronto wants to do. But I wouldn't expect it to look vastly different from either of these teams. These teams, they've gotten to where they are because they've been good at what they've been doing. And I think that is going to be the rule of thumb for both coaches going into this game.
So then do you think that this all points to a much more open game, like a 4-3 scoreline, or are you expecting it to be much tighter than that? Really? Well, I mean, obviously you hope so, but do you think that's possible?
I do think it's possible. I really do. And I know for a fact it's what I want to see. But, I mean, it is a cup final, and cup finals do tend to be tighter and lower scoring. And that's why, I mean, a bunch of us went out to dinner last night and we were joking about standing for 120 minutes of scoreless soccer and then suffering through penalties in 20-degree weather with the wind whipping in off of Lake Ontario. So that is a totally realistic possibility. But I do think that if you look at the matchups and the attacking talent out there, I mean, you could talk yourself into, this is going to be a 3-2 game. You could talk yourself into that mindset pretty easily.
That makes sense to me. Well, you mentioned us in terms of who went out to dinner. I don't know if Will Parchman was there, but we have talked to Will Parchman. I know you have some familiarity with him. He was talking about kind of the weird paradox of Toronto's attack, that you would think that you would leave the big man up top. It'd be the little man who does all the running. Toronto seemed to do the opposite, where they leave Giovinco up top. Josie is the one who tends to drop deep. That has posed problems for opposition in the past. Do you think Seattle will have a specific game plan for dealing with that, or will it just be sort of a case-by-case, we'll deal with Josie when he drops, and let's just not let Giovinco do Giovinco things?
I think it has to be that, because if you start bending yourself a little bit too much, then you get away from who you are. That said, Toronto's most dangerous now, I think, when Giovinco actually does drop into the hole, but it's Josie and Tosaint Ricketts up top, because Ricketts is he's a north-south player, so he's always pushing that back line deeper and stretching things out. And with the back line preoccupied by that, Josie has room, and the midfield suddenly becomes preoccupied by Giovinco, so he's dragging players with him, and then that allows Justin Morrow on the left side and Stephen Beitashour on the right side to get forward. If you go back and you look at the header Josie scored against Montreal in the first leg, it's a perfect example of that exact type of setup. There is no perfect way to handle it because they're all such good players. And you just have to kind of trust that, they will figure out a way to get the job done. I look forward to watching that battle in particular.
Yeah. Well, maybe if you're Seattle, you hope that Giovinco has another sort of off night, as he did in that second leg. I said it wasn't very good. Alexi Lalas said I was being generous with that categorization. From what you've heard, was there anything off about him? Was it an injury, or was it just a rough night for Giovinco?
Nobody has said anything that would lead me to believe that it's an injury, but he sure did look injured, didn't he?
He did.
And especially after Hassan Kamara cleaned him out in around the 75th or 80th minute. So I think that I think that there's something there, but at the same time, he is still Giovinco. So underestimate him at your own peril.
I will never do that for fear that he would just come to my house and school me just for fun. But while we're on the subject of injuries, what's the latest with Ozzy Alonso? Is it still he's probably going to play, but he might be injured, or is there anything more firm than that?
Questionable with a knee sprain. And of course, Brad Evans and Eric Freeberg are both questionable with various knocks as well. But of course, Ozzy's the big one. Since 2009, since they became an MLS team, they have always had Ozzy Alonso, and as long as he's on the field, they've had a chance. And whenever he's off the field, they have been absolutely dire. So they need him to be healthy. They need him to be as close to 100% as possible. And if he's not 100%, there's no excuse for Toronto FC. They should absolutely win this game against a Sounders side with an injured Ozzy Alonso.
All right. Well, that all sounds good to me. My final question for you then. On the show, we like to go specific predictions rather than like, what do you think the scoreline is going to be? So is there anything like very specific you think you're going to see tomorrow night, or you would like to see tomorrow night? It could be like a Giovinco sombrero. It could be a Josie Altidore, like, muscly play. It could be Nico Ladero playing a ball that had eyes. What do you expect to see?
Oh, man, that's a good one. I think that I think we are going to see an Armando Cooper dive that earns a free kick that leads to a Toronto goal.
Wow, you got real specific. I was ready for I don't know, Michael Bradley with a pass. You went real specific. I like it. All right, well, if that comes true, we will definitely let you hear about it. But until then, Matt Doyle, thank you very much. I know you're very busy, so thank you for taking the time this evening.
No problem. My pleasure.
Cheers. Have a good night.
Thanks again to Matt Doyle. Again, I haven't heard that interview. I'm going to hear it when this show publishes. I'm looking forward to listening to it.
I'm going to say, at this point, Matt Doyle and I, best friends.
Where's that leave me?
You're around. You're fine. You're an acquaintance. Okay. You're certainly a work acquaintance.
Following up on our MLS Cup conversation the other day, we had the question from Justin Miller about tifos, and I'd said that my favourite tifo I think I saw was I'm a Sporting, the Ralph Wiggum tifo by Columbus fans, I believe. I got some context about it that makes it even better, which is that it was about Ralph saying, I'm a wizard, and he was dressed as a wizard, and it was about this change from KC Wizards to Sporting KC.
See, this is what I'm talking about, soccer fans. I love clever soccer fans. I love clever supporters groups. It's good stuff.
And thank you to there were many people who let me know about that. Everybody did it politely. Nobody said, hey, idiot.
See? There we go.
Even though sometimes I can't say words.
You mean like aluminium?
Don't even get me started. One extra thing we got pulled up on, we haven't mentioned Clint Dempsey in terms of this Seattle team going to MLS Cup, which is kind of crazy but also kind of understandable.
Yeah, I think because at this point it's... How do I say this? It's a very sad situation because there's a decent chance that we don't see Clint Dempsey play a competitive game again.
We don't know, but based on him being out for so long with a heart condition, is likely to be the situation, right?
Yeah, and so I think in terms of previewing this game, it is strange to not mention him, but by the same token, to allocate time to discussing Dempsey when he hasn't been a figure for this team for so long would have been maybe a little bit disingenuous.
And it's because this team that has gone on this MLS Cup run, it's kind of like the way that Portland figured it out towards the end of 2015. It's like Schmetzer, it's Ladero, all those things happened without Dempsey, and then you've got this Seattle team.
Right.
So that's what we're thinking of. But obviously, there's no question that Dempsey has played this massive role in propelling Seattle forward. So I really hope that he's watching and that he enjoys the game.
Yeah. Me too.
And I think
he probably will be. I would guess he'll be there, yeah.
All right, we'll look out for Dempsey on TV.
We will.
Once again, the game is Fox, 8 o'clock, Saturday night. I did all that backwards, but that's when it is. We will be watching. We will be putting our review show out that night. Late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, you'll get our review of MLS Cup final, whatever happens.
There we are.
Final thing on today's show, the Scouting Network, Tyler, the Total Soccer Show Scouting Network. We have 2 reports today. Oh, it's a slender Scouting report network today.
It is indeed.
You want to go first?
I will. We've got a report from Joe McKiernan scouting Gabriel Barbosa, the 20-year-old Brazilian forward who moved to Inter this summer. Since moving to Inter, things haven't gone too well for Gabigol. He's been in the squad 10 times, hasn't started a Serie A match, and only subbed in once for 16 minutes. 16 minutes in Serie A this season. As a result, he's been linked with a January move to Leicester.
What?
But as Joe points out, and I'm quoting Joe here, I can't see why Inter would send away a player who they, in parentheses, 2 managers, mind you, feel has enough qualities to be consistently named to the bench, end quote.
So there's a tale of 2 Gabbies here, because if you look at Gabriel Jesus, who was signed by Man City but stayed with Palmeiras, he's lighting it up.
He is.
Right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's because Gabriel Jesus is a very good player. So too is Gabigol. I think the difference here is that, as Joe pointed out, you've had 2 different managers who probably... Maybe it was Frank de Boer, I think, came in, and it was going to be maybe slow development, bringing him in, but getting him in youth team experience, getting him some cup games. Then you have a different manager, and he's kind of in damage control. His priority is not developing players and making sure young players are happy. It's getting results.
Turn the ship around kind of thing. All right. The second report comes from Michael Lazar, who's scouting Jordan Morris. Michael says that in an interview with Men in Blazers, Morris talked about his left foot, or lack thereof. He said, I'm not going to make any excuses, and my left needs to get better. He went on to explain, but I'm pigeon-toed, and people don't necessarily always understand that my feet naturally point inwards, and so, in many cases, it's much more natural for me to use the outside of my right foot, and it's funny that sometimes when I use the outside of my right and things work out, no one really says anything. But when I use it and it doesn't work out, they say I need to get a left foot. He then wrapped up with, which is true, I agree, I need to work on my left foot.
Which is good. I like that he didn't make any excuses, but then kind of made an excuse, but then agreed that he needed to make it better.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think we should probably talk about with Jordan Morris, because I don't think we've talked about it on the show yet, is the burgeoning, developing relationship with Leslie Jones.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, we talked. Leslie Jones was enamored with Jordan Morris via Twitter. But did you see...
Like aggressively defending him with that goal against Colorado.
We did mention that on the show.
We did.
Said to the commentators, you don't play, you don't know.
You're not scoring. Yep.
She also wore a Seattle Sounders jersey at the closing of last week's SNL.
She wore,
right?
Pretty sure it was a Jordan Morris jersey.
No, it was Les Dog.
Oh, it said Les Dog. That's right.
Les Dog on the back. So it's actually technically a Christian Roldan jersey because it's number 7.
With that. I like to think that she chose that. I'm actually hoping that was sent to her by Seattle.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be great to think that she went out and found a Seattle jersey, but I also like the idea of Seattle just being that aware of let's get her a jersey, and maybe she'll wear it in the closing credits, and that's exactly what happened.
Something about that made me really, really happy because if someone wore a Seattle Seahawks jersey, an NFL jersey at the end of SNL, it's not a big deal, right? Because everybody sort of sees NFL jerseys around, just showing your support. It's like Leonardo DiCaprio wearing a college basketball cap, but something about seeing a soccer jersey on that stage made me really happy.
But it wasn't just that she was wearing it. It was that she wore it facing the camera, then turned around so you could see the back. Was clearly pumped. And I think if you're doing that, it's an awareness that people like that you're watching soccer and that you have clearly hit upon a group that like you and enjoy what you're doing. So I like the idea of Leslie becoming this ambassador for soccer.
All right,
I can't wait for her thoughts on relegation promotion.
It'll start with a wait. That's all from the Scouting Network from today. If you have scouting reports, send them to contact@totalsoccershow.com. If you'd like to join the TSS Scouting Network, where do people go, Taylor?
They go to totalsoccershow.com/subscribe.
They do. You faked me out pretending you didn't know.
I do.
If you would like a TSS shirt or a TSS scarf, you go to totalsoccershow.com/shop. You can get 20% off a scarf at Roughneck Scarves using the code TOTALSoccerShow. And we know Jeremy did. Thank you, Jeremy, for your recent purchase. All right, Taylor, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Daryl, for doing the same, and thank you to Jermaine Dupree and Jermaine Genus for also being Jermaines. Bringing it full circle.
Listeners, thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again after MLS Cup final.